ever sometimes get the feeling when we go into a new month that things seem a little too peaceful, seems a little too quiet around here? I'm looking around my industry. Everyone's scheduling their vacations. The next big thing, quote unquote, is Big Ten Media Days or SEC Media Days. People are starting to buy their preview magazines. People are starting to make their travel plans for the fall. All of this is well and good, but the insinuation there, maybe even the assumption there, is that nothing else can happen between now and then. And that's when the bomb goes off. And I think we may have one go off in July. So let's dive into a jam-packed show tonight. We're high atop a sunburned downtown Nashville, Tennessee, Sunday, June 30th, the year of our Lord 2024. Yeah, we may just have more realignment news coming in July. We got a new month right there on the doorstep. And by the time we exit July, perhaps college football looks a lot different than when we knocked on the door and walked into July. Texas and OU have already made it official. They made it official several years ago. They're coming to the SEC like today. And there's some myths, there's some fact, and there's some fiction about what's going to happen. But also, I think there's a fair amount of fact and fiction that one of you pointed out that I'm going to address tonight about the status of those programs as they enter the SEC. I've got what ifs on the show tonight. I've got bold predictions on the show tonight. I've got some borderline hate speech and nonsense being cast at poor innocent Dan Lanning out on the West Coast. He ain't never done nothing to nobody. And now all of a sudden, Dan Lanning can't do this and shan't do that. No one said shan't. I inserted that. But you get the spirit. You go a couple of years into this profession and don't win a literal national championship, they'll cast you on the scrap heap. They're watching us in Winter Haven, Florida, Portland, Oregon, Sandy Springs, Georgia, Scottsburg, Indiana. Thank you guys so much. Programming note, hold on. As is tradition, we have to pop the paper to get everyone's attention when we have a programming note. I have been dutifully informed that July 4th is going to happen this week. And we take it very seriously around here. So we will not have a show this upcoming Thursday. But fear not, because we are going to have you a show Tuesday. Not only that, but Jesse, I heard we're going to be down in Fort Lauderdale for some weird project Tuesday. So we're going to do the show live from Fort Lauderdale, which means nothing to you other than the studio will look nicer than this rental we're in right now. So Tuesday, not only are we doing a show Tuesday night, it's going to be early. It's going to be 5 Eastern, 4 Central, because some of us have to catch a flight that night. And so there you go. At Late Kick Josh, follow along for all relevant updates on that front. Let's dive into this show tonight because I did not want to beat around the bush here. I've seen some people wondering about some things that certain folks have been posting on the internet, the World Wide Web today. And believe it or not, we were all going to talk about this to lead the show, so why not? The whole FSU wanting to get out of the ACC thing is not new. Even if you've been paying just a small bit of attention to college football or college athletics even, you know that FSU's trying to get out. Clemson's trying to get out. North Carolina, a lot of these schools want out. They don't like their situation there. And if you're new to the game and you wonder, what do they want out for? Well, it goes back a long way and it's a long story. But essentially, it boils down to money, and they're not going to get enough of it. And they don't like being boxed in. And they're looking at what the SEC's doing. And they're looking at what the Big Ten's doing. They want to be doing that thing instead of the thing they're currently doing. So we've talked about this a lot on the show. And if you're unfamiliar, go back and find the videos on this topic. However, there were and still are a lot of rumors out there about when this would happen. Hey, it's easy to say this stuff. This stuff's vague. That's what FSU fans come to me most frequently in the comments and say. Why are you saying things that are so vague? If you claim you know something, why don't you just spill it? It's a good point. Here's my reason. I don't know. I don't know the details. No one does. Even the people more informed than me. Even the people that are ultimately going to pull levers on various parts of this decision, I don't think know the full story. Now, it could be that in retrospect, we get the full story when they write the book on not if, but when FSU leaves. When we end up getting the book, hey, maybe there was some maybe there was some group of wizards behind the curtain over here, not just one that knew the whole time. The feedback I get is that's not the way it is. The way it is this little enclave of folks over here know what's going on in their lane, and this little group of people over here know what's going on in that lane, and maybe they talk, maybe they communicate, but there is no possible way, given how tangled the web is, for someone in my line of work to have all those details. And if I did, If someone trusted you with that, there's especially no way I'd be able to spill it. Don't worry, I don't fit into the latter. I fit into the former. However, doesn't mean I don't talk to anyone. So I'm going to reiterate what I told you last week, I think, on the Late Kick Extra Pod. On the legal side of this front, I do have pretty decent contacts. These contacts do not necessarily care about sports. They care about their legal careers. And so they informed me a couple of weeks ago, get ready. Get ready. These are not people that are prone to hyperbole. Again, they don't care. But they did give me the good courtesy of letting me know that whatever kind of dominoes were put in motion a couple of weeks ago, it's going down. When is it going down? Can't possibly know. But I will say this, in talking to a couple of other people informed on the matter, not involved, but informed on the matter, here's something to consider that I, from two different folks, got told enough to where it made sense to me and it kind of raised my antenna a little bit. It's a foregone conclusion amongst pretty much anyone who knows anything that it's a matter of time before Florida State makes a move. How they're going to do it is beside the point because you're not involved. I'm not involved. We don't need to figure out how. We just know it's coming, or we think we know it's coming. The decision makers involved in when that's going to happen are of this world. This world, meaning they don't wear a whistle around their neck. They understand marketing, strategy, promotion, dollars and cents, of course, but they understand there is a picture here much bigger than just Doak Campbell Stadium or Clemson or Florida State or fill in the blank. They understand that there's a whole bigger world. There's a world with several zeros on the end of it. That's what this really all centers around. And what I'm saying that for is I want to take you back about 3 years. This month, 3 years ago, we enter July. No one's talking about Texas and OU and the SEC. No one. And then we get into mid-July. And where was it that year? I think Birmingham or Atlanta. SEC Media Days starts. And you wake up the morning the bomb goes off and you know nothing. And all of a sudden, you get a text or you check Twitter or you get an alert sent to your phone or someone calls you and says, can you believe Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC? And that was the first you heard of it. You can't overstate the impact that had on this space, but also just on the entire ecosystem of not only the entertainment industry, not only collegiate athletics, but listen, the college landscape in general from an institutional level. You can't overstate how big the impact was. They maximized the impact because of how it was handled, when the lever was pulled, when the trigger was pulled, when they did it. Other people were paying attention to that. So we're coming up on Big Ten Media Days. We're coming up on SEC Media Days. I keep getting told from people who are much more in the know on this than me, July. I think there's a mid-August date that technically, if you're a Florida State and you want to get out in time for 2025, you kind of need to have the ball already down the hill by that point. That's in the weeds. When would it be more opportune to do this? It would be opportune in July. Now, the question that is both valid and irrelevant to me right now is how? How? Josh, it's easy to talk. How are they going to do it? Well, I don't know. I do not know. It's not beating around the bush. I'm telling you, I don't know because I'm not in those conversations. But when you are told by enough people who are privy to the conversations, one way or another this is going to happen, the how becomes kind of irrelevant for me. In other words, as long as I'm confident that Florida State is confident they're doing this one way or another, I don't care how they do it. I do care when they do it. And I think the when will be sooner rather than later, at least from a news-breaking standpoint. It's not just going to be Florida State. Florida State is the face of this, though. I do want to address one thing, though, because I've had some disagreement on radio in the past week with some folks about this. And Paul Feinbaum actually had a quote about this. He was asked about the Big Ten, and Florida State may be going to the Big Ten. And he said something that he's not the first to say. A lot of people have expressed this sentiment, so I did want to touch on this. He said, I know Florida State thinks they're heavily in demand, but there are some questions about what exactly they bring to the Big Ten. Now, he's referring to a few different things. You could take it any of a number of ways because he kind of meant it every way. Academically, what he went on to not just suggest but outright say is they don't fit the Big Ten portfolio per se, and that's just from an academic standpoint. Cardell Jones rolls his eyes even as I say that. Also, he's saying the Big Ten's already plenty deep enough. Do they need Florida State? So I guess I disagree not only with the sentiment that he's expressing there. A lot of people have suggested that Big Ten doesn't need Florida State. SEC doesn't need Florida State. Well, no, they don't need anything. I don't need to eat tonight. I'd prefer to eat tonight. I would make it. I'd survive without dinner this evening. The Big Ten's test here, if they have an opportunity to add a Florida State, to me is about institution versus inventory. I'm a believer that we're in sort of a postmodern world in a lot of fronts when it comes to college athletics and college football realignment. For instance, back in the day, not too long ago, first off, academics mattered a whole lot, and I'm not sure we're in the institution-centric model that we once were with how athletics have been totally carved out from the institution like they will be moving forward. But number two, I'm not so sure that the grabbing of media markets for the Big Ten and the SEC matters nearly as much as it used to. Recruiting pipelines, maybe, but I even think that's overblown these days and moving forward. What I think matters more than anything is once you've got your media rights deals in line, and once you've saturated to a pretty maximum effect depth of team in your conference, you just go add inventory. You've already secured the land. You've built the store. It's bigger than any other store in town. You've got the shelf space. Don't you just look to put as much quality product on the shelves as you can? That's what adding Florida State does. Or for that matter, that's what adding a Miami or a Clemson or a North Carolina does. Not just in football, but I specifically care about football. Or let me dumb it down even more. Giving me more Michigan versus Florida State is never a bad thing. Never. I don't care what the cumulative GPA is, nor does anyone else. That ultimately has to do with how much these deals are worth in the first place. Because let's not get it backwards, with all due respect to the distinguished alumni networks and the professors on campus there. The reason that these things have so many zeros attached to them is because you got folks who may have never darkened the door of a classroom in Ann Arbor or Tallahassee who are paying good money to not only buy TV networks, buy packages, go to games. That's why this is worth what it's worth. We're not stupid. We all understand that. And if you can give me more of that, or in the SEC, if you could give me more Oklahoma versus Florida State, that's inventory. That's what matters. I think we may have movement on this in July. I think we may have news coming on this in July. I don't know for sure. That's not misleading, because I'm telling you right now, I don't know for sure. I have a feeling that's somewhat guided that we may have something moving on that in July. Welcome into the show tonight. Are you tired of talking conference realignment? I kind of am, but it's also exciting and intriguing because at least it's an unknown. I have resigned myself to the idea that a lot of these conferences are not going to be what they once were. Morbidly, I am more curious about what happens with the Big 12. Big 12 may end up looking great out of all this. We'll see. What ifs? We've got a bunch of what ifs on the show tonight, because there is football to talk about. And also, let me switch that around. There we go. I've got a very, very deep show. I mean, listen to how heavy this pack of papers is. Very deep show tonight. So thank you so much for joining. If you haven't, just make sure you subscribe to the channel. That's the end. I'm not asking you for 5 things. Subscribe, and then in true recruiting fashion here at Pate State, we need you to bring 5 friends and have them subscribe as well. Okay, here we go. Speaking of, I don't want to call it America's Conference because that's the Big 12, but speaking maybe of the premier conference in college football, heavily debated in the comment section, let me give you a little what if tonight. What if the SEC does not cannibalize itself? What if the SEC has like 5 or 6 teams that win double-digit games? Obviously, it's a best-case scenario for them. They got a bunch of teams. Georgia, Texas, Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri, Tennessee, they all have over-under win totals of 9.5 or higher. Certainly, there is not a world where they all hit the over, but, maybe A&M or maybe Oklahoma surprise and hit their over in exchange for Bama or LSU not. Point being, let's just play it out for argument's sake here for a second. 12 teams in the playoff this year. You've got your auto bid, and then every other, you got 4 auto bids, and then we've got to fill the playoff field with at-larges. So the other day, I asked what happens or what if the SEC cannibalizes itself. And the champ's 11-2, and you just got a bunch of 8-4, 9-3. Well, this is the inverse of that. What happens if there's this clear separation? There's almost like a big tier 1, no tier 2, and there's just a garbage tier 3. So you either won 10 games or you won 6 games. Unlikely but not impossible. What would the playoff committee do? So I've got a theory on this that I think bucks what most people think would happen. It's unrealistic, but let's just say, take the same scenario. Let's say 4 teams win 10 or more, and another 2 teams go 9-3. Pretty much the same thing. You're looking at a clump of half a dozen teams there with either slam dunk or very strong playoff caliber resumes. Are half a dozen SEC teams going in the playoff? Here's my theory. A lot of unknown here because it's the first year we've ever seen the playoff committee have to fill out 12 teams in a format. I have a theory there that if you're already 4 or 5 teams deep, I'm not a believer in the SEC benefit of the doubt bump. I actually believe the opposite. I believe if you already got 4 or 5 teams in, and there's another program that has a playoff-worthy resume, I actually think that SEC affiliation may hurt them. It may victimize them. Whereas if you just went blind resume and you looked at a bunch of these teams at the end of the year, but you forced the playoff committee not to know who they are, you don't get to see the team logo, you don't get to see the conference affiliation, you just have to look at their record, strength of schedule, metric, whatever you value. I think they'd end up putting more SEC or Big Ten teams in than they'll end up putting in the early stages. And then I think the SEC and the Big Ten will become very aggravated with that. They'll say the quiet part out loud. They'll say, that's not why we expanded this thing. We expand this thing for more inclusion. What's wrong with you people? What if? To me, it's one of the big overarching what ifs in college football this year. These power conferences, and we got 2 of them. 2 big power conferences. What if they just load this thing up? Well, everyone else won't like it, but the 2 power players will be happy, SEC and Big Ten. But if the SEC and Big Ten have some what they deem to be playoff caliber resumes and teams that are left out, simply because the committee looks around and says, well, we can't make it full of just you guys. How do they respond? The rest of college football will be happy about that, and they'd be able to, take an actual breath instead of being choked out like they believe and fear they will be. How would the SEC and Big Ten handle that? This thing is not just etched in stone. There's a lot that's still very exploratory about this. Next up, out west, what if USC's defense does not improve drastically this year? I think the first thing that would happen come December is I would trade places with a lot of USC folks. See, right now, I've been very cautious with this because I don't believe they'll make these quantum leaps and bounds improvement defensively this year. A lot of my USC viewers do. So they've been calling me a Trojan hater, this and that. You can't just have an opinion on something. If it's negative, it has to come along with hate. So USC hater here. Well, what would happen would be the net result if they do still underachieve defensively again this year, despite bringing D'Anton Lynn across town, a guy who I believe in. The staff they put together, I believe in them. Got no problem with that. I don't think they have the players yet. So that's the reason for me feeling how I feel. But if they do end up falling short and they don't live up to the hype that a lot of the fan base has started to generate for them, I'd be sitting here saying, this is what you should have expected. But what will happen is a lot of folks who I think are buying into the year 1 defensive hype there would go completely opposite direction. They'd freak out and they'd want changes. They'd be calling Lincoln Riley's job into question. And I'd be sitting here in December saying, what are you doing? That makes no sense. And I'd be arguing with them, and it would sound totally different than the arguments that have been going on in June and July around here. This process takes time. Okay, so this is reasonable to me. It's reasonable to expect them to struggle defensively this year to me, not to the degree they did last year. They should be better, but need I remind you how much better they have to be to even scratch the surface of the top 50 in defensive rankings? You choose the metric. They weren't even close last year. They were in the hundreds in most of the critical defensive metrics. So it takes time. Lincoln Riley will not be afforded that, is my fear. It's not a hot seat conversation. It's Riley got a few years in, and I'm a believer that when he left Oklahoma and Alex Grinch decided to come with him, he understood, man, if this guy's going to come with me, I got to give him a couple years at least. And he did. And you can call that a mistake or not. Alex Grinch was not the best guy for the job. And you maybe should have known that the day that Lincoln Riley arrived in LA, but that's the past. Even if everything I'm saying is true, that's the past. Credit to him for making the move and flushing the defensive staff and hiring a new one that is worlds better. One of the most improved defensive staffs in the country. Credit to him for that. How about let's now understand that if you're going to be realistic about this, it has to include giving him a couple of years. But no one wants to talk like that when a head coach is already on his third year at a school, at a current institution. So the way this will sound is not, well, USC's defense still struggled, but don't worry, it's just the first year of sort of the remodeled program. He'll get it figured out. It won't sound like that. What it'll sound like is in year 4 or year 3, whatever he's in, Lincoln Riley's USC has now gotten worse every year. That's what it'll sound like. And for broad strokes purposes, that will be true if that's the way it goes. And then if they don't pick it up in recruiting, if they continue to bleed in recruiting, that same person who says that is going to look at the recruiting class and say, ... And it doesn't look like it's going to get much better, because you remember those 2 big defensive linemen that we talked about a couple of weeks ago who were committed at that time? They're not committed anymore. And there's a quarterback who's very loose in that class as well. So if they don't backfill with quality candidates, then there'll be a lot of earned criticism. I'm not trying to carry water for Lincoln Riley. A lot of that will be earned. Of course, this is entirely hypothetical. They could go 11-1 and shut everyone up this year. But if it doesn't just magically come together defensively, wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world. I actually don't expect it to. And as a result, if they're sitting there 7-5, 8-4, it doesn't mean he made the wrong moves. It may just mean there was no move you could make given their personnel situation and have a top 20 defense. You know, the EA sportsification of USC's defense is pretty unlikely to happen this year. Third what if? Hop a jet all the way across the country. What if Kyron Drones, the quarterback of Virginia Tech, what if he leads them to a top 5 rushing offense? Does anyone realize what that would mean? What kind of tremor effect that would have in the ACC? You're used to talking about FSU, as you should be. Clemson, as you should be. Miami sort of snaked their way into the conversation this year. But if you look at the odds to win the ACC, if you go over to FanDuel, you get past those first 3. You got Louisville in there. You know, you got NC State in there. But you don't get too much further down the list before you see Virginia Tech. And there's not this massive drop-off in the odds before you get to Virginia Tech. What are odds makers seeing there? Well, if you were to promise me Kyron Drones at quarterback is part of a top 5 rushing offense, you would see a contender to win the ACC, because you look elsewhere on this team and they will not have to spend a whole lot of September figuring themselves out. It's a veteran-laden roster. They return 4 offensive linemen. They're leading running back returns on top of Kyron Drones. They've got a top 10 overall team in terms of returning production. It's a good defense. It's a good pass rush. They should have potentially an elite run game this year. Their schedule is very manageable. And Virginia Tech's the kind of team who could sneak up on you but shouldn't be able to sneak up on you, because a lot of the indicators are there with this team. Now, I know that they would prefer the country not realize that, but part of being a contender is being able to perform when expectation is there. They've got a game at Miami the last week of September, and they got a game with Rutgers the week before that I'm not overlooking, but that's not a conference game. They open conference play at Miami, and I don't think anyone in the ACC is really focused on that game so much right now. Miami folks are focused on their game at Florida. Clemson folks are talking about FSU and vice versa, and FSU is talking about Miami, and there's just not a whole lot of chatter right now outside of certain confines about Virginia Tech. And you know what? I think there should be. This is a buzz up there that's been pretty bottled up. We were up there in the spring. I went up there and watched practice, talked with most of the staff. No cockiness whatsoever. They know. They know they're still pretty thin in certain parts of the roster. There was an effort by Brent Pry and his staff that I need you to understand had to be started from scratch. The concept of Virginia Tech keeping key talent in Virginia home used to be taken for granted. And the previous staff did not maximize that effort, to put it lightly, to the point where not only, were your Ohio State's able to come into Virginia and take elite talent, that's Ohio State. That's one thing. But, dude, South Carolina or Penn State coming in and just plucking guys as they saw fit. And Virginia Tech not even putting up a fight. They had to hit the reset button, essentially, on in-state recruiting. And this is not Alabama, okay? Virginia Tech's not a national recruiting program. So in order to rebuild essentially the backbone of the program, they've had to rebuild their in-state recruiting infrastructure, which is never a sentence that should have to come out of my mouth, but it has. Well, they got the right cats up there to do it. It's just not an overnight process. But now you get another year in, and think about what that would do. Think about what kind of giant billboard that would be if they end up being the surprise team in the ACC this year. So those are 3 what-ifs for me. Not done with what-ifs because we're doing them every show, but those are some on my mind. Academy Sports and Outdoors, I would argue, should always be on one's mind. Me, you, the combinations are endless there, should be on your mind. Here's why. This week and this month is sort of the pinnacle for outdoor activity, I would say. Even for people like us. People like us, people who talk for a living, or if you write for a living, if you cover a sport, even for you, this is the time of year where you can maximize your outdoors time, and you need gear. You need equipment. You need literal clothing to wear. Why spend more than you need to for lame-looking gear when you can get the legit stuff, probably for less in most cases, at Academy Sports and Outdoors? And here's the other kicker. If you're watching or listening to the show, I trust that you enjoy it, at least to some degree, and I appreciate you guys for watching. They make it free for you. There are a lot of shows out there who have to ask you to subscribe with money. I ask you to sub, but it's free. You don't have to pay anything here because of partners like Academy. And we appreciate them. They've been with us for a long time. If you can't get to an Academy Sports and Outdoors in person, academy.com, they got your hookup. I need to pause. Oh, let me get my Publix jug over here. Sometimes we have a chalice on set. Sometimes we have a cup on set. And sometimes we just go straight hobo and we drink out of full water jugs. And tonight is Hobo Sunday. So I thank you for bearing with me because I have something I think is very important to talk to you about, because I think we're going to end up clipping this one. Like this is highly likely to be a segment that I ask Colin 2 years from now to pull up. So I wanted to be hydrated for it, and I don't want my nose to itch, and it does right now. All right, there we go. What do you think about Dan Lanning at Oregon? I've been getting some weird comments on Dan Lanning. It kind of hit a crescendo today, so I figured I'd toss it in the show tonight. There's a weird thing happening with him. It's sort of a weird modern thing that happens in college football. This dude has been a head coach all of 2 years, going into his 3rd year now at Oregon. He is 22-5 as a head coach, not a typo. Got 2 top 15 finishes. They're recruiting at a top 5 level, maybe better this point moving forward. They've been assassins in the transfer portal, and so I say that to someone who doesn't know me any better, and they'd say, that sounds great. This guy sounds like one of the best head coaches in the game. That's good, right? Nope. Not according to trusted internet sources, it's not. I put out a tweet today, and I said, let me actually get you the exact quote. It was a classic fill in the blank. What a revolutionary concept I came up with there, fill in the blank. Dan Lanning's next 5 years will blank. Got a ton of comments, got a ton of traction on this. Here were some words. The word can't was involved a lot. He can't win the big game. That won't change. He never will. Oregon will just be talented, but they never will get over the hump. They'll choke against better teams. What has he won? The age-old go-to there. What has he won? 2 years. Dude's been a head coach. 2 years. He can't. He won't. He never will. These people are not joking. I saw Bud Elliott going back and forth with someone today, and the dude was just saying, well, Dan Lanning always what? Dan Lanning doesn't always even park in the same spot at the football facility. He hasn't been there long enough. So anyway, the book's apparently been written on Dan Lanning. You remember how I explained wish casting to you the other day? It happens. It's happening with Dan Lanning. Here's some truth serum for you. I think a lot of the Big Ten, if they're smart enough, should be fairly terrified with what Oregon's doing right now, but they don't want to be. Just like me, growing up in Georgia as a winter weather fan, did not want to accept the fact that it was going to be 68 degrees on Christmas Day. I wanted a white Christmas. So what did I do? Never mind the fact that it's the first week of December and there is no dependable long-term forecast out. I just start blindly believing it's going to snow this Christmas. This is the Christmas. Fort's in Georgia. It's going to snow this Christmas. December 10th, December 15th, December 20th, the 15-10 5-day forecast, not looking good, but I just wish cast it, because that's how snow actually happens. Well, sure enough, Christmas morning, rooster crows, 63 degrees and sunny. What happened? The same thing that's happening to those foolish enough to think Dan Lanning, all of 2 years in, has taught you everything you need to know about what he and Oregon will be as both a head coach and a program moving forward. So I am to believe that 2 years in, since this dude has lost a couple of games to Washington, since he got boat raced by Georgia in game 1 of year 1 as a head coach, that's it. That's it. We've learned everything we need to know. Because the one thing we know about Nick Saban, for example, is he never lost early in his career, did he? Well, getting word Nick Saban lost plenty. In fact, I'm getting word Nick Saban wasn't remotely what you know Nick Saban as until years into his coaching career. We don't afford guys the time to do that anymore, I guess. I got a story for you. Once upon a time, this is worth a paper pop here. Once upon a time, there was a head coach that got his shot. And he was a promising up-and-comer, pretty big name in the assistant coaching world, a really good recruiter. And he took this new job, high-profile job, and he won pretty quickly. And he recruited at a very high level, and it had amazing intensity and energy, and the program quickly came to adopt his energy and his identity. However, there were critics. There were critics who, after a few chances in big games where they came up short, said, he just can't win the big one. He just can't get it. He just can't get over the hump. And this dude's name was Kirby Smart. And no one who was ignorant enough to say it about him at the time is ever around to admit they said it. But I promise you, they said it about this man. They said he can't get over the hump. He can't win the big one. Georgia's just, they compared him to Mark Richt. Jesse, you remember this, right? Colin was with me the first time we ever did this show in Nashville at 24/7 and CBS. At the time, one of our first shows we did, it was because people were floating around one of these popular graphics that used to circulate the internet. For some reason, I don't see them anymore. And it was this split screen. And it was Kirby Smart's first fill-in-the-blank years, and it was Mark Richt's first fill-in-the-blank years. And they looked really similar. The numbers looked really similar. And it was supposed to lead you to believe that Georgia fired Mark Richt and just got Mark Richt 2.0. By the way, that's not a terrible thing because Richt wasn't a terrible coach. But the point was that graphic doesn't get circulated anymore because the same people who use words like can't and won't ever, they're the same people who make that graphic, not understanding there's a big difference between have not and cannot. Kirby Smart had not won a title at that point. He has since won multiples and probably not done winning them. Dan Lanning right now, there's a lot of things he has not done yet that maybe cannot is the wrong word for. They aren't stopping, is all I know. At Oregon, the effort right now, the stacking of elite recruiting classes is not going to stop. I don't even know if they'll make the playoff this year. I'd be willing to bet they are. I don't know if they'll win the Big Ten in year 1. I'd be willing to bet they'll be a big factor in it. Even if they don't, I don't care if they go 9-3 and miss out on the thing entirely this year. They'll be right back in the conversation next year, and then the year after that, and the year after that, because they're not a window program. Oregon, once upon a time, was kind of fashioned as a place where if you build and you build and you build, you look 2 years down the road, you can circle that year and say, all right, well, we got this team. If we can hold it together, we may have a puncher's chance that year. That's not Oregon anymore because Dan Lanning did what I thought was impossible. He built an SEC program on the West Coast. The last one to remotely come close to doing something like that was Pete Carroll in the early 2000s, and that's when that term SEC program didn't even mean what it means now because the SEC as a conference was not then what it ended up becoming and what it long since has been now. Lanning's exposure to head coaches has included working under Nick Saban and working under Kirby Smart. And if you were to copy-paste those guys and drop it in Eugene, Oregon, you'd basically have Dan Lanning. So they nailed their coaching hire. He has returned and returned and returned on that investment in the way of building a roster that's going to be a sustainable year-over-year contender. And what you do is the same thing you do at Bama, same thing you do at Georgia, same thing you do at Ohio State. You get the best players. You got to be relentless. You can never have too many. You can. It's like watching a squirrel store up nuts for the winter. You fill those cheeks as much as you can, or in this case, you fill that roster as much as you can. You got to be as selfish and as cutthroat as possible, because injury happens, but also you're eventually going to go toe-to-toe with one of the few other programs in America that recruit the same way you do. All due respect, they're not stacking this roster because they got to face Purdue. They're stacking that roster because they got to face Georgia one day. They got to face Ohio State. They got to face Texas. They got to go through Alabama. They know who they have to go through. They'll be in that conversation every year. Anyone who suggests otherwise is suggesting it a lot more out of wishing than guided knowledge. So I took it upon myself to bookmark a whole lot of this stuff today, because a lot of the things that I think they have not done so far are about to get crossed off a list in the not-too-distant future. And then what do you say? Just talk about Phil Knight, I guess, talk about Nike, as if that's not part of the game these days. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on. Let us move on. I know from certain corners of the industry, I'm going to get some feedback on that one. That's okay, though. Make sure you are subscribed, though, if you're watching and you're not already. There were some big goings on today in college football. I don't know if you were paying attention. Jesse, I don't get the sense most people knew. Today was the day, or maybe tomorrow, July 1st, is the day officially that Texas and OU joined the SEC. So we had a tweet right on cue. We had a tweet about Texas and OU, but not about them joining the SEC per se. It was about this perception that I think is real. I think the perception, at least, is real about Texas and OU. So one of you asked, Colin, here's a good endpoint for you. One of you asked, as Texas and OU enter the SEC Monday, officially, why is there this perceived gap between Oklahoma and then several levels and then Texas? Why is everyone treating it like it's Texas, end paragraph, start new paragraph, and Oklahoma? I think I have some reasons, but this is not invalid. If you feel that way, if you live in Oklahoma, you're an Oklahoma fan, that's valid. That absolutely is how it's being presented. The over-under win total at FanDuel this year for Texas, 10.5. OU, 7.5. So it's not just a media thing or a fan thing or an internet thing. It's a Vegas thing too. This is in relation to this year's teams, of course, when it comes to Vegas, but the perception is Texas as a program, different level than Oklahoma. And what's crazy is a lot of times year over year we have new people come to the sport. And I can see in our audience metrics, you've got different ways to detect whether people have watched for a long time or whether they're pretty new. And I picture someone new. I picture someone from good old Enid, Oklahoma, who you've always rooted for Oklahoma, but you don't really immerse yourself. But this year you've chosen to take the leap. Welcome. We're happy to have you. You may be sensing this. Oh, they think Texas is way better than us. It must be because of on-field results, right? No. Oklahoma's 7-3 in the last 10 against Texas. They are 11-4 in their last 15 against Texas. Well, they must have won more titles at Texas then, right? No. Oklahoma's got a 14-4 lead in conference titles since 1996. That was in the Big 12. Now they're coming to the SEC. Okay, Josh, well, certainly then, most recently, Texas must be just recruiting at a different level than Oklahoma. The last 5 years, Texas has averaged a class ranked 7.4. Oklahoma has averaged being ranked 9th. Not a huge gap in recruiting. Well, what about the portal, Josh? Texas has done good there. Yeah, Oklahoma's done better. So they've got the head-to-head. They've got history on their side, both recently and more long-term. Recruiting has been pretty comparable. Portal has been edge Oklahoma. Where in the world is the perceived gap coming from? I think three things are in play. There's bias towards Texas that I think's undeniable. Number two, I think there's a lot of recency bias. And what they do is they don't think back to the Red River Shootout last year. If they did that, they'd know Oklahoma won the game. More recent than that, what did we see last year? We saw Texas make the playoff, which fulfilled on a lot of predictions that people had been making year over year over year over year. And finally, Texas made some folks look smart, and they love them for it. But the thing about it is Oklahoma won double-digit games last year as well, and there were a couple of one-possession losses that stood between them and maybe doing a whole lot more than just a nice, solid bowl game. But I think at the core of all this, for some reason, the stink of Brent Venables' first year and his record being 6-7 still lingers, much more so than Sark going 5-7 his first year. That was a year prior than Brent Venables' first year, but also Texas has a playoff appearance, and that playoff appearance, whether it should or not, it just washes everyone's memory clean, whereas Oklahoma had a nice year last year, 10-3 last year. Wasn't a playoff appearance, though. Playoff appearances are magical. Having said that, though, if I were Brent Venables, I wouldn't change a thing. Oklahoma thinks they have their guy for the long haul. That's why they just locked him up with an extended contract last week. Brent Venables is not showing an ounce of doubt. They're totally resolute in their approach. In fact, I would imagine the year one to year two improvement from 2 years ago to last year, he probably never doubted much, but I think it may have reinforced that he's the right guy and his way is the right way and trust him when it comes to the rest of the organization. Then it becomes a whole lot easier to sell on the transfer portal circuit with guys like Deion Burks coming in from Purdue, who could be an instant game changer, will be, I think, if he's healthy, this year at Oklahoma. They get to play him every year. See, that's the thing about rivalries in college football. When you don't have people in suits get in the way, you get to play them every year on the field. Oklahoma, point spread underdog, they will be, won't matter. Just like Michigan with Ohio State, that matters as long as they got to have us for 60, as long as we get our shot. And October 12th, that's when it happens. A 3-week stretch there, 3-game stretch. There's a bye week baked in here. But how about this? Oklahoma opens conference play against Tennessee at home. They go to Jordan-Hare and Auburn the very next week, bye week. Then they got Texas in Dallas. Yeah, it's an SEC schedule. Going to be fun to watch. But yeah, I don't think there's the massive gap. But I get suckered into blindly believing in it a little bit as well. So I won't say I'm immune to it. I just think every good thing Texas does gets amplified a little more than every good thing Oklahoma does. There's no other way to explain it. There is just a pro-Texas bias that is baked into the college football ether. But I'm telling you, I didn't grow up a fan of either one of these programs. If I had to choose a side of that equation, I'd actually embrace the Oklahoma side. I'd actually embrace folks doubting constantly, and after every year or an extended period of years, no matter how much we prove ourselves, it's like people get amnesia every summer. That just means you got to go reprove yourself year over year. But hey, complacency, never an issue. When everyone doubts you constantly, complacency is never an issue. That's my best guess. That's my best explainer as to why that perceived gap is there. But hey, quick note, as long as the perception doesn't become reality, you'll be fine, and it will even make the seasons more fun for you. I need to, in a very rare move, in fact, I don't think I've ever said this sentence on the air, I need to circle back to something I said about the college football video game the other day. I did get good feedback from many of you who never play video games who said, that was actually a really informative segment. Well, that's the only way I'm going to talk about the EASports College Football 25 video game on this show is if I can make it interesting to people who never pick up a controller. Because otherwise, it's a niche conversation and a waste of time. So, believe me, friends, believe me, this will interest you whether you're a gamer or not. EA Sports College Football 25, it launches in about 20 days. And it's going to be a holiday. There's no two ways about it. It is the biggest thing happening in the college football space. Whether you play or not, understand it's a huge deal. It's a tsunami in terms of a lot of things. So I want to touch on this for a second. But first, the power ratings shook you guys. Thursday, I talked about the offensive and defensive ratings they had released. Well, they released just outright team power ratings. I think it was Friday. This is the way teams will be ranked in the game. And I am in Nashville, Tennessee. So for the next couple of minutes, I just need to go full Rocky Top. I need to be a Tennessee homer. I don't know what's happening. I honestly don't know what's happening. Tennessee was not a top 25 offense. Tennessee's not a top 25 defense. Tennessee is not a top 25 team in the rankings. Is there probation in the game? Like, is Tennessee legitimately on EA probation? Is that a thing, Jesse? I haven't played the game in a while. Is that a thing? I don't know what other explanation there is. So Tennessee has their own just barrel full of issues to figure out between themselves and this game. Either the folks at EA know something about this year's Tennessee team that none of us know, or this is going to be like an entire Denny's worth of egg on the face of the fine folks who we love that are responsible for such things at EA. Secondly, guess who is in the top 25? Guess who's in the top 20? Colorado's up there. Colorado number 16. Josh, that's just a marketing ploy. Maybe it is. Like I just said, I'm not sure. Perhaps the folks at EA know something about Deion Sanders' team that none of the rest of us know. If Colorado's a top 20 team, I sure don't know that. So Colorado's up there. Ole Miss at 15. I mean, I am to believe that if we were to take the neutral field implication here, that Ole Miss and Colorado would be a virtual pick'em on a neutral field. We all know that's insanity. But if EA Sports rankings hold up, that would be the case. That would be a big headline. Clemson's at number 6. Clemson is the top-ranked team in the ACC. And I am trying to... So Florida State's at 12, Miami's at 13. So Clemson, a 90 overall, right there with Texas, Notre Dame. Fascinating stuff. But that's not the only reason I wanted to talk to you about this tonight. I can't overstate the impact this has on the absolute youngest of generations. So any given cycle in college football, there's a group of people age 10 to 17 or 10 to 20 who are in their first generation of really being a college football fan enough to where they understand what's going on. Well, the past couple of generations, the past generation really, they didn't have the game. And video games serve as a front door for a lot of people who otherwise would just never find college football. And I know if you don't play this stuff, you don't understand that. Folks who play it know exactly what I'm talking about. You assume that if there's a 13-year-old kid out there who picks up this game this year and ends up becoming a diehard college football fan because of exposure to the game, you may assume, oh, he otherwise would have found the game anyway. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. The way media works in the modern age, even though there's a lot more of it out there, therefore you would think there's more chance for you to be exposed to or interact with a thing, is it actually creates just bigger ISO chambers. So algorithmically, big tech platforms find out what you like, and they serve you a whole bunch more of that. So you're getting more thrown in your face, but it's just reinforcing more of the same thing. And so I'm saying that to say there are a lot of kids out there that if the algo doesn't pick up on the idea that they want college football, it'll never give it to them. They're not watching traditional linear television, so they're not going to see advertising the same way that you would have seen it 30 years ago via a commercial or a billboard or whatnot. Video games are a door for a 13-year-old to find his or her way into college football that otherwise wouldn't have existed. Quantum impact on the sport and its watchability, but also it comes with a downside. And I'm preparing you for this now. It's going to hurt us all. We're going to have to cope because it is a necessary evil. You will never have seen a flood of people questioning play calling more than they will this year in college football. And it will not matter that they cannot talk their way out of a wet paper bag when it comes to actual chalk talk X's and O's. These are people who believe that because they just beat NC State 27-20, playing as Virginia Tech on EASports CFB25, that they called a game. They chose the plays, therefore they did virtually the same thing that an offensive coordinator does in Lane Stadium on Saturday. Some of you are laughing. You should be. It is a joke, but I'm not joking. It's coming back. Now, people have always questioned play calling, but for this game to have been out of the ether for a while, it gave us several years where people questioning play calling mainly just came from folks who think they know more than they really do. But now you have a mechanism that's going to reinforce the idea that they know more than they really do. So questioning play calling, I think, will increase 300 or 400% this year online. It'll mainly be online. And so I have this entire concept, and I'm just waiting. I got coordinators that listen to the show. I'm just waiting for one of you guys whose head coaches allow you to talk. If you want extra money, not that you guys are hurting for it, but if you want extra money, I have an idea for a show where you confront fans who legitimately are willing to question your play calling to your face. And it's no filter. It's no holds barred. I'll get the thing sold by tomorrow if any of you are willing to do this. But I want you to just school people who are willing to be schooled. They're asking for it. This is like the old Pros versus Joes show that they did, where you found these folks who legitimately thought they could hit major league pitching, or they legitimately thought that they could tackle an NFL running back in the open field. Make them prove it. And so in this world, you got folks who want to question your play calling. Make some extra money off dunking on them. It's going to be a fun year. It's going to be a fun year for us all. All right, let's move on. There was a rule, got a big rule change in college football that I did want to touch on. Some of you asked about it, and I wasn't really going to discuss it, but the more I went through the latter part of last week, I had some people reach out to me about this in like all different walks of football, and this is a big deal. So there was an NCAA rule change this past week that impacts coaching staffs. It's a really, really big deal for me, for you, for everybody. Something really, really big. Couple of things that are really big that are going to come off of this. So the NCAA rule change, it essentially removed the cap on how many staffers can coach on the field. So it used to be that you had your 10 allotted staff spots, and even in practice, like you can't have people who aren't quote unquote on the coaching staff participating in coaching on the field. It was a joke because most programs had staffers that were all over the place at practices. I've sat at practices before, and as soon as they close that gate to the local media, an army, like kicking over an anthill. They come right out of the tunnel or right out of the complex. And so not everyone was going by this rule. However, there were certain things you absolutely couldn't do that you can do now. Now, there's a downside to this. I'm going to explain both things, both sides of the coin here. The downside is, had someone who is really, really involved in sort of the business end of coaching reach out and say, FCS staffs are screwed. G5 staffs are screwed. You guys never get good headlines, I know. What this does is your Clemsons of the world, your Floridas, your LSUs, folks with the biggest budgets, the NCAA just told them there's no limit to how many coaches you can have on your staff. Many as you want. Many as you want. And so what you can do now is you can go find the wide receiver coach at a G5 program. You could probably afford to give him a 100% raise to just come be an analyst or be a down-the-line coach on your staff. And he won't have that same title, but what he is getting is he's getting real-world, on-field, hands-on, resume-building experience at a major program. I think there'll be a flood of that happening. Not right now, because staffs are kind of set for this year, but come December and January, those programs are going to get rated. That's not a good thing. However, be that as it may, if it's going to happen, this will have, I think, a very, very huge benefit on a chronic problem that has been facing coaches, and it's burnout that a lot of people don't care about because a lot of them get paid a lot of money, and you also don't see the day-to-day. You see them coach on Saturdays, you see them talk to the media, but what college football had become was totally untenable. There were good people just outright leaving the sport, a lot of other ones trying to go to the NFL to get away from college because college was unworkable right now and the NFL was preferable. Pro football should not be easier to do than college for a coach, but yet that's the way it's been lately. Well, now think about this. Huge win for staffers. Right now, as it stands, if I'm Ryan Day, if I'm Kirby Smart, and I want my defensive line coach, I need a guy who can recruit. My linebackers coach, my wide receivers coach, by and large, I can't be working around their recruiting inadequacy. I need them to be able to recruit. Now, there are instances where, guys are so good at their position coaching that you work around it. They're not good recruiters. You don't send them out, but by and large, you do. You don't have to do it anymore. Really, if you want to and you're really ready to invest the money, You can go line up your coaching staff, and you can have 5 or 6 of them never hit the road recruiting if you don't really want them to. You can just totally prioritize football and have them totally prioritize football, and you can have an entire roster full of all-star recruiters. As long as they consistently coach on the field, which is the rule, you can send them out recruiting. I think it's going to really, really change the way that head coaches and general managers with head coaches build these staffs, again, to the detriment of FCS programs and G5 programs. But I also think it gets rid of disparity in enforcement. So let me tell you, now that this is not a rule anymore. Yeah, okay. So it's not a rule anymore, so I'll be a little more loose on this. Couple of things. This was happening at practices. It's not a coincidence that practices became more closed off to the media in the last decade or so. COVID had a lot to do with that, and then some places said, we're just not going to open it back up. But really, there was another thing that happens at college football practices that they didn't want the local media seeing. And that is, a lot of folks who technically weren't allowed under NCAA rule to coach on the field were coaching on the field because there was no way to get a team ready doing it the way the NCAA dictated you had to do it. Well, here was the problem. It's like driving 63 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone in Atlanta, for example, or any major city where the speed limit is absurdly lower than it should be. Most everyone just says, forget about that. We'll go a safe speed, but we're not going 55. Well, there are a few cars that go 55. Just like there were a few enforcement staffs out there with certain programs who would not bend on this. No matter how much the head coach complained, no matter how much the assistants complained, no matter how much they brought in coaches from other staffs that told that enforcement staff, oh, dude, everybody's doing this. That enforcement staff said, we're not doing it. No bend, no interpretation of rules, we're not doing it. Well, it puts you behind a giant 8 ball. And this was a reason why some staffs moved on. Some coaches moved on from certain institutions because the enforcement staff was too rigid on this thing that already wasn't being adhered to. Well, now it's not an issue because it's not a rule anymore. So I think the situation of burnout will be addressed in the positive here. I think G5 and FCF staffs are going to drastically suffer because of this. But I also think at least you won't have the great disparity in enforcement because one place is much more stringent on such things than other places are. They're watching us in San Marcos, Texas, Jacksonville, Alabama, and Detroit, Michigan. Appreciate you guys. We got some unpopular takes on the show tonight. Paper stack. Got some unpopular takes here. First unpopular take. It's my favorite time of year. The unpopular takes are great. First unpopular take tonight. 11 a.m. kickoffs provide better exposure for teams than later kickoffs. That means noon Eastern, I would assume. There's no specification on which platform he was talking about here. He just said the noon Eastern time kickoff, that's better exposure for teams. Well, that's not really true. And no one loves a noon kickoff more than me. I'd kick off the entire sport at noon if I could. No, not quite that drastic, but I love noon kickoffs. But if you're a pure Tier 1 team, like if you're Ohio State, if you're Oregon, if you're USC, you can play any time of the day you want. People are going to find your game. The general rule of thumb to me is if you are a lesser-known program, it helps you to play later in the day. Because I'm a believer in looking at audience patterns, and audience patterns dictate that hardcore fans watch all day. The more casual, like P2 and then casual P3 fans, this industry terminology, but it just means the less passionate they are, the less diehard they are, the more likely they are to not be watching early in the day, the noon kickoffs. They filter in for the 3:30 kickoffs, and then they're there for the primetime kickoffs, because in their mind, primetime equals bigger game. And it does equal that in pro sports. It doesn't always equal that in college sports, which to me is a good thing, but to some people is not. So if I were a lesser-known program, I'd want to be playing as late as I can because mathematically, just statistically, people are more likely to bump into my game, and I'm not a known commodity. If I am Florida State, I'm known. If I'm Tennessee, I'm pretty known. So it doesn't matter if I play at noon or 7:30, people are going to come find me. So the exposure thing, I don't even think is just broadly applicable across the sport. It means different things for different programs. Ohio State doesn't need any more exposure. So it doesn't really matter what time of day they play. Penn State is known. Now, at that point, those folks up there look around and say, here's our other beef with the noon kickoffs. We can't be doing a whiteout at noon. So get out of the way and give us our primetime kickoff. That's the exposure we want. And to that, I say, I did a segment on it 2 weeks ago. I agree with you guys. I'm willing to, when I am college football commissioner, I am willing to create special carve-outs for that. But you got to elect me first. Next up, this one would be dramatic if this one were to come to pass. Ken said, mark my words, LSU will be the most overrated top 25 team this season. And then he said full stop. So you know he really means it. Thank you for the emphasis, Ken. Their over-under win total is 9.5 right now, for those wondering, at FanDuel. It's 9.5. What would have to happen for FSU or for LSU to be the most overrated team in the entire top 25? So that means take all the top 25 teams. It looks like LSU is going to be in the 10 to 15 range, judging by preview magazines. So if they're remembered as the most overrated team out of all of them, that means they went like 5-7 or 6-6. Because you know good and well, there are going to be a couple of full-on disaster years in the top 25. So for LSU to be the worst one, I think 6-6 or worse. What has to happen for LSU to go 6-6? Well, I figure you got to bank on Garrett Nussmeier not being anywhere close to the answer at quarterback. They never come close to matching the rushing numbers that they lost when Jaden Daniels went off to the NFL. Not only that, but you got the whole new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, unproven, running back stable. You're replacing 2,700 receiving yards and 31 touchdowns. None of it backfills. So you've just got a middling offense that pales in comparison to what you had last year. That has to happen. And then I think also defensively, despite all these new staff moves, inability to make big moves in the portal at defensive line ends up costing you all year. I think lack of portal success has to bite them. Defensive line and DBs, they, if not regress, they just don't progress. And then I think the schedule difficulty has to verify. So you look at the preseason FanDuel odds to just win it all. LSU plays 5 of the top 20 teams to win the whole thing. And they got USC to open the season. Their first conference game's at South Carolina. They play Ole Miss. They go to A&M. They got Bama. They go to Florida. They got Oklahoma. All of those teams have to end up being good, and all of them have to beat LSU. So if all of that transpires, it'd be a bad year for LSU, and then Brian Kelly would have all kinds of uncomfortable conversations surrounding him. I'm not sure all that's going to happen. So this is a very unpopular take. Now, if I were to ask people over-under on LSU, you'd get a fair amount of under-action, but they'd be saying 8-4 or 9-3. 6-6 or worse? Just falling out of the top 25 entirely? People saying you were the most overrated team in the country? It's doubtful, but that's what makes it an unpopular take. But here's a good follow-up. I don't really have an answer for this. You guys can give it to me in the comment section. Let's say this is true for a second. We get to the end of the year. There's no bowl game. LSU's like 5-7. What do you do? Unless it was just injuries all over the place, the likes of which you've never seen. If their football team just isn't good enough to be 500 or better, what would you do? It's off the edge of a cliff in terms of comparable data points, like going back in history and finding some comparable situations. What do you do? Woof. If, on the other hand, you think that that's out of the realm of possibility and LSU may be the most underrated team in the top 25, I have good news for you. Their over-under win total is 9.5, and you can go bet it at FanDuel right now. If you think Garrett Nussmeier is going to be a revelation this year, go bet him to win the Heisman. He's not the favorite. Go bet him at serious plus money. You can do all that at FanDuel because they are the exclusive odds provider of this show. And really, you could do it even if they weren't in business with us, but we really prefer you to check out FanDuel. Not only because of that, they take responsible gaming very seriously over there, which is why they don't mind me telling you, if you have an ounce of doubt about this, don't be going and betting your money on anything. If you don't know what you're doing, don't be betting your money on anything. If you're unsure, it's okay to just go over there and look. You don't have to be betting. So if you have no interest in betting, just go peruse at your leisure for entertainment purposes. There's a lot of fun stuff over there that if you've never bet and you never plan on betting, you'd still probably find pretty interesting. Okay, last thing I wanted to do here tonight, I promise you guys bold predictions. I will make sure to get you bold predictions, like right now, for example. The big rule around here this year, for the first time, is if you make a prediction that is 9.5 or bolder, as determined by me, and your prediction hits, I am sending you a chalice of supremacy. We've had a few 9.5s already. Let's see what we can do tonight. All right, boldest predictions this year, the things that you claim you'd bet your own money on. First bold prediction. After 3 consecutive losses, Tyler in Maryville, Tennessee says Ohio State beats Michigan by 2+ touchdowns this year. Well, we have 2 bits of information from our friends at FanDuel. Number one, there's already a line on the game. You could bet this right now if you wanted to. Even though it's the last week of the year, they have a future number on it. Michigan at Ohio State. Ohio State minus 9.5. They're a 9.5-point favorite right now. But they also have an alternative line on it, or an alternate line on it. Just so happens to coincide with this prediction. You could go bet Ohio State minus 14 right now at plus 130, which is probably something I'd wait to do a little bit later in the year, but it's out there. In fact, Ohio State is more likely to win by 14 or more than they are to win by 1 to 7 points. So odds makers don't find this bold. Odds makers find it somewhat likely. 4 of the last 5 games in this series have been decided by 14 plus. So even though it's very fierce, there have been Michigan 42-27, Michigan 45-23. Last year's game was close. But several years before that, 3 years before that, Ohio State a double-digit winner in all the years. So double-digit wins are a norm in this series. Is Ohio State going to do it this year? It's a 7 for me. This is not out of the realm of possibility at all. Having said that, it's also not out of the realm of possibility that everyone's predicting that, and then Michigan goes in there and wins outright. But, I mean, if odds makers are telling me it's plus 130 juice at minus 14, I'm going to make it a 7 on the boldness scale. Next up, we haven't talked about Arkansas in a while. Mike up in Russellville, he said Arkansas wins 8 games this year. Then he put a lot of qualifiers in there that would probably happen if Arkansas won 8 games. So, bad news, Mike. Well, actually, good news for you. I'm making this a 9.75. So if it happens, chalice of supremacy coming your way. The over-under win total is 4.5 right now, and it's juiced to the under. So you got to pay more of a premium to bet the under at 4.5. There are reasons for optimism. Deep breath there. The deepest breath of the show. There are reasons for optimism. Taylor Green is a quarterback transfer from Boise. Hopes and dreams are riding on him this year. Bobby Petrino is back as the offensive coordinator. So this pairing, it's not negotiable. They have to mesh, and they need it to explode. It will be a very volatile offense. It could be a really, really up and down, hit and miss offense. The weeks where they hit, they could randomly go to Auburn and win a week after they lose against UAB. I could easily see that kind of stuff happening this year for them. They are definitely going to be an underdog in 8 games this year. Definitely an underdog in 8. Could be 9 or more. So they've got to pull several upsets. Getting to 8 is going to be really, really tough. I'm going to make that a 9.75 on the boldness scale. Next up, a lot of creativity here. It's pretty bold. Let's talk about the college football playoff. 3 teams from the state of Texas will make the playoff. The way I figure this is both Texas and Texas A&M have to make it because of what I'm about to say. In the Big 12, you got Texas Tech, Baylor, TCU, and Houston. Not impossible, but unlikely that you see a playoff team come out of that group. SMU is in the ACC now. Crazier things have happened, but unlikely. And then you look at the G5. So let's just say Texas and Texas A&M made it, which is tough, but not impossible. UTSA, their over-under win total is 8.5. Texas State, over-under win total of 8.5. So maybe one of them gets in. The G5's got to have at least one team in. So maybe they get in, and maybe both the SEC teams get in. This is a stretch. So this is a 9.25 on the boldness scale, but not impossible. It wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world. Hat tip for Rice appearing there on a graphic. Did not know we'd have food on the show tonight. And lastly, let's wrap it up with a 9.5 here. Grand Rapids, Michigan checking in saying Riley Leonard is in New York City for the Heisman ceremony. So not that he wins it, but Riley Leonard transferred from Duke to Notre Dame, quarterback. He's going to be a Heisman finalist. Remember last year he was hurt. Year before at Duke, he was a 3,000-yard passer, 700-yard rusher, really good player, had a ton of hype last year, and then was banged up. Mike Denbrock, who coordinated the offense at LSU that won the Heisman last year with Jaden Daniels, he is the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame now. So as you come back to the college football watering hole, familiarize yourself with these staff moves. That's a really big deal. So you got a really, really good talent at quarterback. You got a really, really good play caller and really good developer, a guy who knows what he's doing at offensive coordinator. Is Notre Dame's offense going to be prolific enough, though, to get him the kind of numbers you need to go to New York City? Because Notre Dame's going to be plenty good defensively where they don't need to play the way that LSU played last year. Not even close. Doesn't mean they can't. He is the 9th player right now on the Heisman odds board over at FanDuel. This is a 9.5 to me. It's not because I doubt Leonard's skill set so much, especially if he's healthy. It's just because there's some things I try and picture in my mind. And I have trouble picturing a Notre Dame quarterback throwing for the kind of numbers that you would need over the past several years. History says that you would need to be in New York. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. That's tough to see. And so I'm going to make it a 9.5 on the boldness scale. There you go. Good bold predictions tonight. I appreciate you guys for watching. Remember, we're going to be back Tuesday. Live show, 5 Eastern, 4 Central. Special start time on Tuesday. And then, we got a holiday weekend, the rest of the weekend. Appreciate you so much. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and the pod. And make sure you bring 5 to 10 of your friends along with you. They're going to be complaining. This time of year, you know what they're going to do. Because you and I used to do the same thing. We used to complain, and we used to say, man, college football coverage is not what it used to be. I used to watch this channel or that channel, and now it just sucks. I don't like it anymore. And they're going to say, oh, what is there? This show. This show is what there is. You just got to let them know. If they hadn't found us already, you got to let them know. We appreciate it. Recruiting around here is very integral to us maintaining our status as America's college football show, as stated by us and no one else. So for producer Jesse, for director Colin, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start to your holiday week, and God bless.